Welcome back here to Flock Friday. I am your host, Chase Coburn. Let's talk about Lamar Jackson's top seasons here in Baltimore, among his many great ones. And now he's going into year 8. So it's been 7 terrific seasons from Lamar Jackson, which have been the best and which have been the worst in terms of Lamar Jackson standards. Number 7, I think it's clear. His rookie season was his worst season in the National Football League. And in the first 9 games of the year, he didn't start. That was Joe Flacco's position. But the team just didn't play well. And actually, that team was 4-5 in those first 9 games before Flacco did get injured. And the keys were handed to Lamar Jackson. He started the final 7 games. Even once Flacco was healthy again, it was clear Lamar Jackson was the long-term answer. And look, I'm not going to sit here and act like he was incredible as a passer. He completed under 60% of his passes, 6 touchdowns in the 7 starts, 3 interceptions, passer rating below 85, QBR below 50. It was not terrific for Lamar Jackson throwing the football, to say the least. 1,200 passing yards. But rushing the ball, he was great. He had nearly 700 yards on the ground, 5 rushing touchdowns. And we just learned a lot about Lamar Jackson. And even though statistically it was not dominant, the Ravens were still confident enough after that season, and even after a lousy playoff game, to hand him the keys to the offense. And that's because of one thing. He won. And that was kind of a pattern here for Lamar Jackson. He is a regular season winner. And in those 7 games where the Ravens were 4-5, he led them to a backdoor AFC North title, went 6-1 in his 7 starts. And the only game they lost was when he went down during the game, yet was still able to lead that team to overtime. That's Ravens team to overtime in Kansas City against the Chiefs, who were the number 1 seed that year. And that was the year Mahomes threw for 50 touchdowns. He was the MVP and the Offensive Player of the Year. He took a Ravens team that was not great in his rookie season where he wasn't that polished as a passer and took Mahomes in Kansas City to overtime. Not a lot of people talk about that. So we learned Lamar Jackson is a winner. We learned he could possibly be given the keys to the offense and he could be a future franchise talent. We just didn't know if he could prove it through the air. And it was in his next 6 seasons thus far that we did learn that he is not only a productive passer at the NFL level, but possibly may go down as one of the greatest ever, depending on how his career shakes up from here. So that clearly Lamar Jackson's rookie season was his worst season in the National Football League and kind of in a tier of its own in the worst way. But we still learned he could win football games, and that was the key to the Ravens giving the keys to the offense the very next season officially to Lamar Jackson. They traded away Joe Flacco, and he ends up winning MVP in 2019. But then things get tricky here when we go along with this ranking because I feel like there are 2 different tiers, and the tier 2 of the list is years 2020, 2021, and 2022. And it feels like those years were great for Lamar Jackson, but not the MVP level that we've seen in his other 3 years that we're going to talk about with him in the National Football League. Among those 3 tier 2 seasons from Lamar Jackson, I think 2022 was his worst full season as a starter. And he didn't even play a full season because he was partially injured. But it's kind of ironic that I say that because it was after that season that Lamar was that he begged for and then was rewarded and received the highest annual salary for a quarterback in the history of the National Football League. That is right, Lamar Jackson. He was paid. He got the money that he wanted, and he deserved it as well. He's one of the best players in the National Football League. And 5 years, $260 million. He was able to get that contract after that 2022 season. And it's funny because as great as Lamar Jackson was, I still think he was a top 5 to 7 quarterback in the league at that time. Obviously, it's hard to look back in retrospect. But Lamar Jackson, that was probably his worst season as a starter, a full-time starter, because 62% completion rate, not great for a guy who at that point had already been an MVP winner, a guy who had led the league in passing touchdowns. So not great from that standpoint. But also, it just didn't feel like he took over games. He had a great start to the year. AFC Offensive Player of the Month in September. Played some great games earlier in the year. Great game against the Jets. Scored 38 points in a loss to the Dolphins, though didn't play great in the second half. Great game against New England. That may have been his best game of the whole season. And kind of throughout the entire year and even beforehand, it just felt like the contract situation outweighed the actual production that was happening on the field. And Lamar Jackson wasn't that Superman, that absolute superstar, or it's clear he's the best player on the field. That didn't feel as apparent in 2022. It just felt like he wasn't as dominant in those games. And look, he still had the Ravens 7-4 before he went down. So I'm not going to say that he had a bad season at all. Again, still, I'm saying he's a top 5 quarterback in the league. But I just think that as a whole, less dominant as a rusher. And needless to mention, I mean, out of the 11 full games he started, in those 4 losses, the Ravens blew double-digit point leads or 2-score leads. They had a 2-score lead in all of those games. They blew 4 of them. They blew, I think it was a 3-touchdown lead against Miami in week 2, a 3-score lead against Buffalo in week 4, a 2-score lead in the fourth quarter against the Giants. And while it's not Lamar Jackson's fault that the defense crumbled down the stretch, it is his fault that he wasn't able to do enough down the stretch to elevate his team. And look, it's all situational. You can go back to the situations. He still had a really solid season. But in terms of the Lamar Jackson standard, the guy who's been ranked the best quarterback in the NFL 3 times in his 4 full healthy seasons in the National Football League, in terms of Lamar Jackson standards, I think this was his worst season, excluding the rookie year at the pro level. Number 5, I have 2020. And I think that this year overall, after it happened, was very underwhelming for many fans because Lamar Jackson was coming off of that historic 2019 MVP season. But when you look back at that 2020 year, to think about how it could have been considered underwhelming is more just a testament as to how great a 2019 year was for Lamar Jackson, how dominant he was against his competition. Because that 2020 season, he was, again, a 1,000-yard rusher of the football, a still productive thrower of the football at a 64% completion clip. I think 64.5, I think it was. 26 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, decent passing yardage, and look, he missed a game due to COVID, had that team 11-4. And so I'm putting in number 5 because even though he was very balanced, it was a little inconsistent. Overall, that team was in general, but this was also the year Lamar Jackson won his first playoff game. Who knows what would have happened if he didn't get hurt? He did throw that pick 6 in the Buffalo game the next week. But overall, this Lamar Jackson was still a very solid version. Now, still, he was not as accurate as a passer. He was not great on the deep ball. And again, overall, that team was just inconsistent. He had multiple games where he had like a below 50% completion rate or in the 50% of completion rate. So he just wasn't consistent enough as a thrower. He was still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but to rank really high on this list, you've seen seasons where Lamar Jackson is one of the best passers in the National Football League. We saw him do both. We saw him pass the ball really well, 26 touchdowns, 9 picks is a great ratio. And then we also saw him run for 1,000 yards on the ground. But there have been seasons where we've seen both at the exact same time, like 2019. And that is why this season was viewed as a little bit underwhelming, but still a really, really solid season with Lamar Jackson. And I got to mention, approximate value, Pro Football Reference, they have a stat called approximate value, where they just talk about how much value you're adding to your team that season. It's an accumulative stat, so you can add it up throughout your career and add it up throughout the season. During that season, Lamar Jackson missed a game, yet had the 3rd highest approximate value in the National Football League. So he was still one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League in that season. And I think the 2020 year is actually one of his more underrated campaigns in the National Football League. Number 4, though, and to kind of wrap up this tier 2 stage, was 2021. And for those of you who weren't as in tune during that 2021 season, some of you may be wondering why this season ranks so high. If you look at the numbers, 16 touchdowns, 13 interceptions, a 64% completion rate, a passer rating below 90, these metrics do not suggest that Lamar Jackson was one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League, that he was willing his team to success and putting his team in a great position to win football games. Not for nothing, he had a game where I think he had 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions against the Cleveland Browns. Like, you never see those types of games from Lamar Jackson. But I think 2021 season for Lamar Jackson, that year, I think signifies that stats, you can't just base a player's success off of statistics. Because if you were there watching the situations, Lamar Jackson, that was the first season where we saw him put on the cape. And they said, look, you got to be Superman. And he was. And that's Lamar Jackson we know now, where the Ravens are never out of any game because they have Lamar Jackson. Climaxed by that postseason game last season against Buffalo. While the Ravens lost, they were down 2 scores at halftime. That game was over. And Lamar Jackson climbed his team back. And whether it's his fault or not, he had the 2 first-half turnovers. You're never out of a game with Lamar Jackson. And that started in that 2021 season, when he led all these comeback wins. That comeback win against Kansas City, 4th and I think 17 it was against Detroit, setting up Justin Tucker in really good range for that field goal kick. Obviously, the game against Indianapolis where you're down, I think 22-3, and then he won Offensive Player of the Week because he had like 450 yards through the air. It was that type of Lamar Jackson where he was just taking over games and clearly was the best player on the football field. And so, yes, the turnovers were high, but that was also because of the surrounding cast that was supporting him during that season. J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, his top 2 running backs, gone. He was working with Latavius Murray, Devontae Freeman, and Le'Veon Bell. In 2017, that's the best backfield in the NFL, no question. But in 2021, newsflash for you guys, running backs age quickly, and they were only a shell, if that, of their former selves. Lamar Jackson really did not have a consistent running back, and yet the Ravens still had one of the best rushing offenses in the National Football League. Receiving-wise, Mark Andrews and Marquise Brown were great. but he was without his blindside tackle. Ronnie Stanley missed most of the year. The offensive line dealt with a ton of injuries. It was Lamar Jackson. He was sacked more in terms of a sack percentage in that season than he was in any other season. And that's because his offensive line was depleted, not to mention his defense was an absolute disaster because of all the injuries they had on that side of the ball as well. The Ravens were the most injured team in the National Football League, and yet Lamar Jackson had that team 8-4 and the number one seed in the AFC before going down with a season-ending ankle injury. So that's why when these people say, oh, yeah, Lamar Jackson now has Derrick Henry and this, that, and the other thing, and that's why he's not as valuable to his team. There were years just recently where Lamar Jackson had that team as the number one seed in the AFC and as a premier Super Bowl contender with a minimal supporting cast. And even though the statistics don't show that, that may be Lamar Jackson's most impressive in the National Football League. To take that team to the success he had, they didn't win a single game without him. Once he went down, the Ravens lost 5 straight games after his absence, and they missed the playoffs and went under 500, and they were the number one seed through 12 weeks or 13 weeks. So it just shows you Lamar Jackson's value to that team. He was that team. He put on the cape. It was a very, very impressive campaign in 2021, but it cannot touch his 3 elite first-team All-Pro seasons at the pro level. And they're so hard to rank. All 3 of them should have warranted MVP. Last season, Lamar Jackson should have been the MVP winner, and we've spoken about that many times on this show. But 2019, a unanimous MVP selection. 2023, statistically not as dominant, but again, an MVP, had the Ravens as the number one seed. As crazy as this sounds, it's considered one of the best statistical seasons of all time. I have Lamar Jackson's 2019 season third amongst his best seasons of his career. And I say that, and you're probably like, oh my goodness, Chase, what are you talking about? Led the NFL in passer rating, touchdown percentage, passing touchdowns in general. One of the highest completion rates of his career at above 66%. 13-2 as a starter that year, led Baltimore to the number one seed. Playoff success. Didn't win, didn't score a lot of points, still had like 500 yards of total offense. What are you talking about? And I think that, yes, I'm not going to debate you. I mean, that was really my first season. Actually, every single year, Lamar Jackson. I've been a diehard football fan now for 7 years. So I've witnessed every single Lamar Jackson game. I have not missed a game of Lamar Jackson. I haven't missed a play, I don't think. So I was very in tune during the season. And there was something about that team that was special. They just killed everyone. They were dominant. I mean, I think they set a record for like most Pro Bowlers, most All-Pros. It wasn't all Lamar Jackson, but Lamar Jackson was a key part of it. Do not get me wrong. I mean, what he did on the ground, extraordinary success. And then to do what he did on the ground, set the single season QB rushing record, and then throw for the most touchdowns in the NFL. It's like unfathomable to think about, like when you think about that concept. But the reason why I have 2019 third is because even though as an individual season, it ranks higher than 2023, the stats back it up, the advanced analytics back it up, the highlight plays back it up. Lamar Jackson was a less polished player then. Because I don't exactly know if I'm ranking the seasons or how they simply were as a player. And in 2019, we didn't see Lamar Jackson go through really any adversity. We didn't know how he would do when he went down. We didn't know how he could push himself back and lead his team to success in the unlikeliest of moments. We just didn't know that. And we we did. We saw what happened in the postseason with the 28-12 obliteration on your home turf when Derrick Henry and Tennessee came in storming. So that's a key part of it. And Lamar Jackson played a much better postseason in 2023. And so you look at the numbers, and someone from the outside looking in might say, how in the world do you think that season from Lamar Jackson was worse than his 2023 campaign? But you just had to watch the games, and you had to see how polished he was. Because in that 2023 season, no, he did not throw for 36 touchdowns. He actually had more than 6 interceptions. He did not have the same passer rating. He did not win a unanimous MVP or have the same approximate value like the one that led the league in 2019. I am not trying to discredit at all what Lamar Jackson did in that season. But in 2023, he was a more polished passer. He was a more polished leader. A 67% completion clip passing the football, his highest passing yards mark of all time of his career at the time. Of the 2023 season, and it just felt like Lamar could do more through the year. It felt like he was a better commander of the offense. And he still had the scrambling ability. He still had the rushing ability. That was probably his worst rushing season at the pro level. But yet he won an MVP almost unanimously again, 49 of the 50 first place votes, because of the sheer dominance he had. And he once again led Baltimore to similar success and actually got them to the AFC Championship game, the only time he's ever done that. And that counts too. He had 4 touchdowns in the AFC divisional round, which was far better than what he put together in 2019. So I think personally that 2023 season was not as good as the 2019 season. But as a player, Lamar Jackson was far more polished and could do far more on the football field at a more consistent rate in 2023 than he did in 2019. But in a league of its own, as the number 1 season of Lamar Jackson's career, we just witnessed it. It was last year in 2024, which to me was a top 5 to 10 statistical and just in general regular season in the history of the National Football League. Look at the numbers, watch the tape. Lamar Jackson last season threw 41 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, had 5,000 total yards of offense, and led the NFL in touchdown percentage, touchdown to interception ratio, yards per attempt, passer rating, and QBR, and approximate value, and was the NFL's representative on first team All-Pro at the quarterback position for the 2nd straight year. 7th person in the Super Bowl era to do that in consecutive seasons, to be the first team All-Pro representative at the quarterback position. Patrick Mahomes hasn't done it. Tom Brady hasn't done it. Only 7 guys have done it in the Super Bowl era. Lamar Jackson is now one of those names. This is one of the greatest peaks we have ever seen. And what we witnessed from Lamar Jackson last season, we may never see again. When you look at some of the greatest seasons of all time, to me, Lamar Jackson's season was right there in that company. Because if you look at the 4 interceptions that he did throw, he threw in his 4 picks, 3 of them were deflected off of his teammate's hands. It was a perfect pass to his teammate that was deflected and then later picked. So Lamar Jackson took care of the football. He added immense value to his football team. Look at what the supporting cast did with him. Derrick Henry improved 700 yards in the rushing yardage category once he joined Lamar Jackson. It's the Lamar Jackson effect. It's what he does. It's the value he adds to his team. And I don't blame the postseason on him. Played a great game against Pittsburgh, did his job, managed the game appropriately. And then the very next week, look, the interception, who knows what the miscommunication was there between him and Bateman. The fumble was bad. It also was a bad snap that he was trying to handle. He mishandled it. But I don't blame the playoff game on him. He put that team in a position to win the football game. To me, he did more in that football field than Josh Allen. To me, he did more in that football field than most quarterbacks would do in that position. He put his team in a position to win. He led that team down the field in a 2-minute drill, down 8 points, was the commander of that offense. When no one thought he could do it, led that team in an incredible drive, found Isaiah Likely in the end zone, had his tight end right there for a 2-point conversion to tie the game and probably send the game to overtime, and he dropped the ball on what was a perfect pass. It's very unfortunate that the season Lamar Jackson put together last year couldn't even warrant an AFC Championship appearance. Because a lot of people are out there, a lot of these fans are on social media saying Lamar Jackson is going to have a down season next year. If Lamar Jackson has a down season, it can be a top 15 season of all time. Like, to say he's going to have a down year is not a crazy statement to make. It was one of the greatest seasons of all time. And maybe fans won't realize it now, but you'll look back in 20 years and you'll realize how great this season was. He was the best quarterback in the National Football League just last season in terms of the value he added to his team and what he provided on the football field. He had the Ravens in a position to win a championship, and unfortunately, they came short. But the season we saw from Lamar Jackson last season may never be replicated. From what he did through the air, to what he did on the ground, to his team success, it was a magical sight. And he provided a lot of joy to Ravens fans and analysts and reporters like myself. And I'm excited to see what he could do again as we await the less than 50 days we are away from the 2025 NFL season, where Lamar Jackson finally looks to capture a Super Bowl championship and maybe another historic season in Charm City. Thank you guys for tuning in to this edition of Flock Friday. Signing off, I am your host, Chase Coburn. And as always, go Ravens.